Today is November the 16th, 2023. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University Library with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. With me is Annawyn DeBenning Shamas, a 1956 graduate of Oklahoma A&M, which is now OSU. And along with me is her daughter-in-law, Annette Shamas. We're in Stillwater in the public library, and this interview will be part of the Stories from Oklahoma State University World History Project. So thank you for coming today. Before we get into your college days and your career, let's learn a little bit about your early life here in Stillwater and start wherever you like.
Well, I'm going to just mention this at the beginning in passing. November the 16th in 1907 was the day that Oklahoma became a state. And so I recognized, I was doing some Googling and I found that information and I thought it was 116 years ago.
Oh.
And my mother was born in 1908. And my history, when I think back on it, I can't believe it really, because my grandmother, my dad's mother, who was Frances DeBenning, she was living at the time of the Civil War. And that is a fact that, to think of it, really places me in a very old category. When I can say I had a grandmother that was living in 1884. So anyway, there I go with my anyway. But it's just kind of overwhelming to think about it. Also, on my Frances DeBenning was my father's mother, and on the other side, on my mother, I have a Chickasaw heritage, and I am very proud of it. When I was growing up, I've just learned what I know about my relationship to the tribe just by bits and pieces until I got to be kind of old. Not terribly old, but looking back on it, I was young when I decided that I needed to know a little bit more. But I have a great-grandfather who was a Chickasaw. And he came over on the Trail of Tears with his mother to Oklahoma when Andrew Jackson sent everybody west, make way for the whites who want to farm and use this land. And so, as most people do know, they moved themselves. I had somebody tell me once, because it is called the Trail of Tears, that it was not called the Trail of Tears because they were crying, as they moved across to Oklahoma Territory then. It was because the people who watched them go by were heartbroken to see them have to be moved like that. So, talking about my great-grandfather, my mother never knew him, but she certainly knew about him, and her mother, my grandfather's Indian name was Ashalatubby. So his full name was C.A. Burris, the C meaning Colbert. Colbert is a very distinguished family in the Chickasaw history. And then the A stands for Ashalatubby. And Burris, his last name, so, C.A. Burris. Ashalatubby means, get ready for this, at least I was taught this, jump up on them and kill them early in the evening. So he was a scout for the South. So I have the Oklahoma, I always wanted it to be Western because when I was growing up, I wanted to be a cowgirl and all of that. But I certainly do agree with those who classify it as part of the South. And it is, I was telling my daughter-in-law just yesterday, or maybe I was telling my son, I'm not sure, but that and I'm sure you know this too, Tanya, that the Oklahoma State campus is considered one of the most beautiful in the nation. Mm-hmm. And that is something that it was beautiful when I came here, when I moved here in the 4th grade. But I want to just say a little bit more about my Chickasaw Nation relationship. I have a daughter who is a playwright, and she told me that I was not on the Indian roll. My brother, Burris DeBenning, it was, and so you see that his first name was my mother's maiden name, and he wanted to get his tribal bona fides or credentials in order. And my daughter, who's a playwright, there were competitions or opportunities to submit her work if you were Native American. And she is, but you don't have to always prove it. But I have 2 cards. One of it is that I don't necessarily have what we call a quantum, saying how much blood I actually have as Chickasaw. And I say that legally I am, my mother would have been a 4th, and I then therefore would be an 8th. It's not quite that high because my great-grandfather was 3/4 Chickasaw and 1/4 French, which I think is interesting too. So I have, a little bit of French heritage from both sides of my family, actually. But so I began trying to establish myself as a Chickasaw. And it wasn't easy. My brother had already done this because he wanted it. He just wanted his sons to have access to the things that are provided to tribe members. One of them is medical care, and you can go in. Some of this, maybe someone would say, "Well, is this really true?" And I believe that it is, or I wouldn't, put it out there. But that when they have an Indian hospital, that you can go in if you are a tribe member, not necessarily of the Navajo or the and get your health care at that hospital. So I began working on it, and when my brother started getting his enrollment number, my grandfather was listed, and he had a roll number, Marvin James Burris, the son of a Shalatubby, my great-grandfather, and he only had to have one source to identify him as a member. However, I started this process when I was older. After he had done it and been enrolled tribal member for, I'd say maybe 10 years. And I was having great difficulty. It changed. I had to have 2. And even though I knew my grandfather was a Shalatubby, and I knew my mother, talked about, she didn't talk about him so much because she, as I said, he was no longer living, but his wife, Shalatubby had 2 wives. His first wife died. She was all Native American. And then his second wife was white, totally. And she was a teacher. And so I am most curious about how they met. I have no way there's no authority that I know of from my family. I think the people who might have a clue about that, are no longer alive, which is too bad. Because I kind of can imagine what it would have been like for him to court her. But I think it's remarkable that they did get married. But I had one source but I could not prove I did have the source of my grandfather, my great-grandfather. But I had, as I said, I needed to have one more. I couldn't find it. So I was told, that perhaps I could use the United States Census to prove it. And the Chickasaw tribe, or the government, I don't know, it has to be just the tribe itself, that didn't work. But you know what? They did accept, the public survey, it's the Oklahoma survey of the census, not the United States Census, but the Oklahoma census. And when I found that out, and this record is in Ada, Oklahoma, there was somebody there who really helped me, and I intentioned so well in my heart to tell her, just contact her again and thank her over and over. But I knew when my mother I would try to do it, I had to do it through my mother, because that's where my, history, my background, comes from. And if I could just, I was told if I could just find them in the Oklahoma census, because it would say everybody who was in the house at that time, then that would be good enough. So I called and talked to the people in Ada about it, and they said they just couldn't find Marvin James Burris, my grandfather. They just couldn't find it. And I'm thinking, oh no, I won't be able to do this. But I hope I don't tear up thinking about it. But I said, all right, I'm going to give you a couple of years that were not the exact years. I said, I think it would be between this and this. And so I'm on the phone, and she's gone away to double check it. And then she came back and she said, I found it. And she found him, and there were my mother. My grandmother was not mentioned in this census, but my grandfather was Marvin James Burris, and then it listed my mother as one of the students, in the house, because the census takes that, as one of the things that they count, who else living there, and or what members of the family are there. Am I going too fast? Does it sound like? Do I sound like I'm speeding?
You're doing good.
Anyway, I almost, in fact, I did. I shed tears over it because she went the extra mile for me, this clerk there, and came up with this, that I could turn that in. And I felt like I was back in a time warp because I was hearing about them back so far, and that my mother, a little girl, where she was 11 years old in this census, and so that's how I managed to get I've spent a lot of time on this, but it is an important thing to our family. It is to have us established, as on the Chickasaw roll. And I mentioned Ada, where this where the archive is, and there are a lot of Ada is in the heart of what was the original Oklahoma territory. And I was born in Seminole. And of course, that's, as we know, it's a tribe, and it is a Native American name. And then after living in Seminole, being born, and we moved to Ada, Oklahoma. So after that, we moved to Kanawha, Oklahoma, and from Kanawha, we lived in Wewoka. So in those first few years until I went into the 4th grade here in Stillwater, in my background, 4 Oklahoma towns, 3 of them Native American names. And I wish that I could tell you what tribes the name came, and I wish I could also, I knew at one time what Wewoka meant, but because they do have names, of course. But I was born on November the 1st, 1934.
Well, happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much. And there's a birthday girl right over there tomorrow. November is kind of an important month in our family. I don't know, maybe 5 birthdays or 4 at least anyway.
So So can I ask why the family was moving so often during those early
well,
years?
You may, and I'll try to answer. As I said, I was born in Seminole, and I remember things from that time, and I was very young when we moved. I think that we might have been. I've just had to rethink all of this because, family members are long gone who could help me out specifically with it. Mm-hmm. But we moved from Seminole to Oklahoma, and the Depression was that was what was going on in the country at that time. My mother and my father attended East Central in Ada, but that's not why we moved there. We moved there because my father was going to go into business there, and he was going to be my family, the Burris family that I came from, Marvin James Burris and Laura Bradley Burris. They were part of that section of the country was oil rich. Mm-hmm. Have you read the book or seen the book? The Killers of the Flower Moon. Yeah. Well, it wasn't, at least to my knowledge. I'm sure that there was stuff like that going on, but it's not anything that I know anything about. But so the Burris family inherited, there were oil wells on their territory. And so all of them, I don't know how many, I think my Shalatupy, he had two families. As I said, his first wife was a Native American, and his second wife was Laura Ann Bradley. And he had children with his first wife, and he also had, so there were two, and we actually intersected with them at a family reunion years ago. It was very interesting, and we could see, looking at them, the Native American, because both parents were Native, they really, showed that heritage, and I think that my own grandfather did it as well, but they were going to invest, and they did, in my father owning and managing the franchise, an Oklahoma Tire and Supply in Ada. They, as I said, they went to East Central. They were both, my mother and father, educated. They were teachers, but this was thought. My dad was very interested in business, and he was grateful to be established. I only know about this just by bits and pieces, but and so we moved there for him to go into that business. And I have memories of there. They built a house there. They moved into it, and I remember the house. We have a house here in Stillwater too, 1424 West 9th, and I would like to have owned that house. I tried to get it, but I was unable to get it. But I think it's interesting that I watched the construction of both of those houses, because when I was a little, maybe 3 to 4 years old in Ada, I walked on the construction site, because families are very interested. If you're building a house, you're watching it develop and grow. And so there I was, walking around on the side, and it had, they were, of course, they wanted me to be safe. And I've put this all together. I have tried to imagine, what was going on with them. And you can only do that when you have a perspective, as I believe, as an adult, to be able to look back and see, this is what was going on, and I remember it. I do remember walking that site. I do remember I'll just describe it like a stage. I was on the set. I was active on this set of construction of the house. And one of the other things, this is experience I remember, that I was also walking around carrying my brother, who's 2 years younger than I, and I dropped him. And thereafter, I dropped him there at the construction of the house in Ada, Oklahoma, and I was never allowed to carry him again. And I shouldn't have been in the first place. But the house that they built here, so I was walking around on it, watching its construction when I was in junior high. And of course, I remember it very well. But that's later on in my life when I would get to that. So we moved to Ada, back to your question, because this Native American, the heritage of the oil, and, we were there, and I remember living in the house. I remember being in the bedroom, and I remember next door there was a little girl that took a nap in the afternoon. She probably was my age, I don't know, and she sang herself to sleep, and I remember that. I remember, when I was sick, and my dad, he rubbed not Vicks Vapor Rub, but he had something like that, but it had, and I've always thought about this smell, I remembered it so vividly. Had eucalyptus in it. Have you? And it was really a wonderful smell, and I remember that as well. But my brother and I, we were children together in this one room, and when we moved here, he had a room that was across from mine when we moved here, and then I had the other bedroom upstairs. But anyway, so they were, as I said, it was the Depression, and to just cut to the risk of it, the business did not succeed. Mm. And there are reasons for that my dad talked about, which I'm not, I don't know that it's appropriate to even discuss it, but I also, tried to think about my parents. I was just a little girl. And I never heard any of these discussions. I've wondered about it. And all of the families that were going through these things in the Depression and whose lives were just totally disrupted from the fall of the financial system in the United States. But I never heard my family discuss this, but I know that they did. There was no way. For the planning to have gone on that was going to be going on with my father's business career, they had to have been talking about it. So we moved from Ada. So the decision, as I said, I never heard any of these talks, and I felt so safe with MJ DeBenning and Evelyn DeBenning that I just had this. I had such admiration and love for them, and they were both such strong, wonderful people that I if they had said, now here we are, in was it Daniel in the lion's den in the Bible? We're going to embrace you. There's a lion's den over here. We're going to take you in arms and we're going to jump in it. I would say, okay, because I was so attached to them both. They were wonderful parents for me, always. And we then, as I said, we moved to, my dad and my mother had teaching positions in in Kanawha. So we moved from Ada. See, I've had to trace this path back through my life because I know one discussed it with me this way. So, but you're just like you're saying, how did you happen to be here, and what was going on in your life? And so I had to examine those things, and I realized that the depression played into it. In fact, my mother was 27 years old when I was born, and that's relatively late in years at that time, but not too late, of course, but for a child to be pregnant with child, and I think I did have this sense to say, why did you wait so long? And my mother said, it was a depression, and we decided that if we waited till things got really, really better, we wouldn't have any children. Of course, that's not quite true because things, did turn around. But my connection with the depression and I only know it by name. I didn't, because as I had said, my parents could grab me and hold me and take me with them, and they did. And I trusted them so. And I know that, that's not, this expression that I have for them is not, it's normal. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to have families, if the good Lord looks at your family and says, okay, I'm going to send, you're going to go to this family, then he really showered me with some love, because with the family that I was born into. My name, Annawyn, is a combination name. It's a combination of parts of my grandmother's names with a little tweaking. My grandmother, my father's mother's name was Frances Pamela DeBenning, or yes, it was DeBenning. Then my mother's mother was Winnie Mae Burris. And my family talked about the fact that Wiley Post, are you familiar with Wiley Post?
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, he piloted Will Rogers, and they both died in Alaska in a plane crash. But his plane was the Winnie Mae. I believe that was the name of the one that crashed. I don't know, but he did fly the Winnie Mae. And we always joked to my grandmother that he secretly had a crush on her. But the Win from Winnie Mae and the Ann, you can take out of Francis, were combined, and so they had Annawyn. And so they just decided, we'll just put an A in there and make it Annawyn. And I've always been happy with my name. I had girlfriends who said, oh, I wish I hadn't been named this, and why did my parents pick this? And I just didn't say anything because I was happy to have that name. I read a book once, it's a child's book, and the name of Santa Claus's wife, it was for children, of course, was named Annawyn. And I am told that the Wyn on the end of a name, it's Welsh. I've been asked if I were Welsh a lot, that means little, whatever it is. So in Wales, I would be Little Anna. And Annette, the E-T-T-E, is French. And so she in France would be Little Anne, just like I was Little Anna. And then, of course, in the Spanish, there's the I-T-O or I-T-A. So anyway, there it is, the crutch word. Anyway, we moved, as I said, to Wewoka after the business failed in Ada. And my parents went back into the teaching profession. And then, so I have now I'm in Kanawha, and that's where I went to the first grade. And I remember my first grade teacher vividly. And we were given, I think, the smallpox vaccination in school, and we lined up outside. And I'm just going to tell you some things, that happened to me, and it's not because I'm bragging or anything like that, but it was my life. And so they were concerned when they were giving that shot or the vaccination about how children would receive it. And so I guess I was pretty close to the front. My name, your last name began with a D. So, and I said, well, that didn't hurt at all. And so they removed me from the line, and they named me Little Miss Sunshine. And so I was there in the front to take a little child's hand and say, you're going to be okay. I was a child, so I wasn't saying something like that. But nevertheless, I really didn't, they really overreacted to me but anyway, that happened to me there. But I was in the first grade, as I said. But I thought something, I don't know whether I've shared this with you, but I think it's pretty funny. My mother and father were both teaching at Kanawha High School. And my mother was qualified to teach English, Latin, and algebra. And my father, the sciences. And so I met the principal, because my mother was in the school, so the principal of the grade school. And I remember, I don't know where it was, but it was in Kanawha. And I could hear my mother talking, to this woman, the principal of the grade school. And she looked at me and she said, we're going to have to get you enrolled. We're going to have to, and it wasn't that, not threatening, it's just, this is going to happen to you. And so this is what I imagined. I was going to be enrolled. And that meant that I was going to be taken to a little hill, and I was going to be rolled down that hill. And when I got to the bottom of the hill, I got to go into the first grade. and I really have, I've thought about that a lot, and, that was so interesting that's the way that I looked at it. I don't think I ever shared that with my parents or not, but so that the year, I think was the year there, I'd really have to I'd really have to do some arithmetic to be sure, but I remember where we lived. I remember the house we lived in. I remember, the people I played with. There was a neighbor, friend was across the street, and I remember that I had a dog there, and his name was Penny. No, his name was Terry, because he was a fox terrier. Wasn't that original of me to call him Terry? But that was his name, and I loved that dog. And then he was gone. And my dad said that he thought the CCC boys might have thought he was a good dog too and taken him. And I since know, what CCC meant. But there was a camp, a CCC camp that was some way connected to Kanawha within walking distance, and they walked by our house, back and forth. And so the history of that, I don't want to necessarily get off on that, but everywhere I go to a national park, if it was built in a certain time frame, there's structures there that were built by the CC. We call them the CCC boys, and that was a Depression act to help feed the country. In that these young men would, and I know I don't have to explain it to you, but they would be paid for work that they did, which would go back to their families as well. And the comparable, thing today would be people coming from Mexico and, sending their funds back to their families in Mexico. And this was my Kanawha life. And my parents always made friends with, their friends were the educators, that they were around. So everywhere I lived with them, I had the wonderful experience of being around other teacher friends. So they had others as well. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention about Seminole. I've gone from Seminole to Ada. Now I'm in Kanawha, but I'm moving back to Seminole.
Okay.
And as you know, I'm here basically talking with you because I was in the theater department at Oklahoma State University at a time of change, and also at a time when history was this, and by the history, the name of the university automatically changed to, the Oklahoma A&M was changed and became Oklahoma State University. And so getting back to what I was going to say about, this is where I am a theater person. And my mother was very knowledgeable about theater, about literature, and every aspect of culture. She was she was steeped in it. But at the Seminole First Methodist Church, when I was 2 years old, stood at the church rail. I can't imagine myself doing, but I did it, standing down at the church rail at 2-year-old and recited a poem about Christmas. And my dad, told me the last line, but the story of what I was reciting was, I'm going to be hanging my stocking, and I'm expecting Santa Claus to come and give me gifts. And the last line is, but what if there's a hole in the toe? And that charmed my dad so much that, just kind of anachronistically, he might just be thinking, and he would say, and what if there's a hole in the toe? And I thought that was sweet. And for a long time, I didn't know where it came from, or what was the reference. And so, but then I did put it together, and I remembered that when I was back in Seminole as a member of the Methodist Youth Fellowship, in which we traveled around occasionally to other churches, I did feel when I went into that church a tremendous homeness to it. And there was a minister there, Irving Smith. He was a minister there when I was active as an MYFer when I was in high school. And I wish I had known at that time and put that connection together, because he came here and he was a minister at the First Methodist Church here for a while. And he was not the minister when I was so darling standing in front of the church and doing it. But I had to have been coached. I don't remember the coaching, but my mother had to have worked with me for me to be able to do that. She more than my father. But anyway, we'll go. I'll go back to Kanawha. And from that period, because I realized my family is continually thinking, what are we going to do to progress careers? So one of the things that they could do. Do you have any questions about?
No, you're doing fine. Just keep going.
To solidify or to augment my dad's credentials. I know this was, like I say, I was never aware of any of these conversations. I know they happened because I know both of my parents were very expressive verbally. And my mother was actually and so was my dad. There was a history of in my dad's family of actors and performers, and he thought his own father was a genius. He fiddled. He didn't play the violin. He fiddled, and he was good. And my dad, he talked about him a lot and how he could perform, and do all kinds of things. That was and from my mother's side, I come from, even though they were Native American, and people have a tendency to think they are, stoic and, not facially expressive much. They were, because I heard some stories about my grandfather, my mother's dad, that he went to tribal meetings, and this is one of the things that he said, and I tell this to people, and they don't slap their thighs and fall on the floor with laughter. It's just mildly amusing, but he would say to the tribe, and I'm not sure if it was my grandfather or my great-grandfather. I think it had to be my father. But he would say to them, "There's not a one of you within the sound of my voice who's heard George Washington speak, and you can't deny it either." And and so I'm thinking what the tribe is doing, sitting here listening to that, and other expressions, like that. But one of the things that he did, and I will not say this word that I am expunging from this tale that I'm going to tell you. There were some. I'll refer to it the way that my grandfather described it. There were some white people who came to him and asked him. He said, we're going to be greeting your tribe members. We'd like to know a word that we could say, something that would endear us, or not endear us. They didn't use that word. That know that we're friends and sympathetic, and etc. So my grandfather gave them a word, which I will not repeat, and so they went around the circle of the Native Americans there shaking hands and said this word. I know the word in Chickasaw, but I'm not going to say it. Okay. I guess I could. It's not a horrible word, but anyway, it's not a word that you would say in greeting at all.
Okay.
And of course, the Native Americans are being, and then after this is happening, so that story, is the one that I think of too, because the Native American people have a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, they do, and we've been misled by the films heretofore in the depiction of Native Americans, but none of them are true. And if you are like I am, you've seen several blue-eyed Native Americans, and I don't believe there's a recidivist gene in a Native American that is blue. Nevertheless, that's an example of the performance on my grandfather's side. And actually, my great-grandfather, Ashalatabi, I forgot to mention this. I'm going back now to his creds. He was a legislator. He was in the Chickasaw legislature. He was a judge. He was a preacher. So he was an ordained Methodist preacher. And my grandfather, on my mother, both of her grandparents, her grandfather, Winnie Mae's father was a preacher. He was a circuit rider. So I've got those two preachers that come from my mother in my history. And sometimes they were both Methodists too. And so that my grandfather on my Winnie Mae, if I say these names, I don't know that anybody will be keeping track who's listening. Winnie Mae was my mother's mother. And so her father was a Methodist preacher, circuit rider, riding horse it's hard for me to look at this now, because when I was in high school, I thought that the 30s were people who lived through the flapper era and all that. That was so long ago, and those people were old, But I'm able to trace my stuff back, my own family, to the Civil War. I mean, and that's pretty, interesting, I think. The other thing I would like to say, he also, Shalitubby, he's a member of the Chickasaw Hall of Fame, which is, they, and I've got several family members, Chickasaw, who have been taken into the Hall of Fame. And he was I was talking a little, maybe I was just talking to your husband, my son, about this yesterday. Are you familiar with the Dawes Commission? Mm-hmm. Shalitubby was the Chickasaw representative for the Dawes Commission. And when I directed a Native American play in Tulsa with the American Indian Theater Company there, and I was talking about, mentioning my grandfather, that he did that. And this one woman who was a friend told me, she said, if I were you, I wouldn't spread that around, because a lot of people, that was not a happy experience. And for wanting to, have a list of Native Americans so that they would know them, so that they could do what to them, Mm-hmm. And they're so, and as I will say and be accurate, there was very many reasons to distrust those decisions that were made by the government. I had a book that was given to me. I can't remember which child gave it to me, but it was about Jim Thorpe. And are you familiar with? Mm-hmm. Well, this book it's a new book that is just out, and it's a big book. It's over 500 pages, and I did read it. And going back, mentioning about, I don't need to go into I'm not qualified to go into all of the things that would lead a Native American to distrust the government. I'm just not. I know, some of it, and I'm open to know as much as anybody's willing to share with me. And I'm also interested in continually learning about it, because it is a major part of my life now. But the school in Pennsylvania that Jim Thorpe went to was Carlisle. And so you have to keep in mind that there were, I don't know, maybe there were 3 superintendents there were superintendents of that school. And I believe it's the second one, and I can't tell you his name. But his motto was, kill the Indian and save the man. And that's a horrible thing, but that literally was the wording of it. So I'm connecting this with the Dawes Commission and why somebody would not want to be on a list that the government was insisting their names be on. And I have a friend back in Colorado who is Choctaw. Her grandmother was Choctaw, just like my grandfather was Chickasaw. But she cannot trace her heritage because her grandmother, out of, I'm not going to do this government thing they want me to do, she was defiant about it, did not get enrolled. And so my friend Margaret cannot attach herself officially, but she knows how much blood she's got. She's got as much as I do as a Choctaw. And the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes are you familiar with their relationship to one another? They were one tribe at one time. That's part of the background of those 2 tribes. They were one tribe, and I'll say this because it makes the sense with the story and there were 2 brothers, and one was Chickasaw and the other was Choctaw, and they were leading the tribe, and they were coming from the west, which usually we think of, the removal of the East Coast area, going west instead of, coming east. And they were led by these 2 brothers, and they came to a place, and there are people who I believe think it's right at this spot that this happened, where they disagreed and they split. but the DNA is it's the same in those two tribes. And if I'll say it now, Miss Locke, Vivian Locke, head of the theater department, who I was a student of hers, and it was a blessed time to have Vivian Locke in your life, as it was to have other professors. But that's farther down in my education. How are we doing with time? Am I?
You're doing fine.
Doing okay. Miss Locke was a Choctaw, and her father, Annette, was. We were reading up to see what information that she could find on the internet, about Vivian Locke, and I knew that her father was a chief. She told me, Miss Locke did. And it been the way it's described in Miss Locke's obituary, or some material, that her father was principal Choctaw chief, or principal chief of Choctaws. And she's the one that told me first that the Chickasaws and Choctaws were related. And it pleased her very much that she was Choctaw and I was Chickasaw, and that we had, that thing in common. But at the time, I just, it was just something that she said. But I've since, I've learned about my history, and I cannot say. I tell people, I can't. There's certain things I can't. I have a tendency to hyperbole, and tendency to be over emotional about things, and so if somebody, I was a debater in high school. My debate partner was Jimmy Webster. I'm not sure where Jimmy is these days, but his mother he had a very nice mother, sweet mother. But anyway, I'm not qualified really to get into discussions, many of them, and I will avoid them. I would. Now, there were times when I wouldn't, and I would step in and realize I was over my head, and I would, that I would just had to be quiet. But anyway, I have learned a lot, and as I have matured, and I tell people I think I'm grown up now. I really think I am. I'm 89 years old, and so I really think I've reached the point where I can say I'm a grown person now. But maybe I'm overestimating that. Maybe there are other people who would be happy to debate the opposite side of that point of view. Perhaps I'm prejudiced. Oh. Anyway, that summer, I'm going to go back now that I've, gone, retreated, and shared a little bit more about my Native American heritage. You have to realize, and I mentioned it and focused on it, how emotional it was to find that last source that I could claim to share to my lineage. I can claim my lineage now because my mother was living in this house with her father, who was Marvin James Burris, and when she was 11 years old, and here's her name, and her father is Native American, therefore she is Native American, therefore I can use her. I could use my grandfather, but I couldn't use my mother because that we could not establish that logical tie and line. The summer after I finished my first grade, which I loved, I did such good work as a first grader. I was so proud of it. I colored so beautifully. I really, and I saved this one workbook I had, and I took it with me. I carried it, it moved with me, and somewhere it got lost. And I have asked about it many times, and It's gone. I mean, there's no question it's not around. But I thought for sure that it, that I would be able at some point to pick it up again and say, I did this and look at it, because I really thought I did good work in the first grade. And I wanted to be reminded of it again. I thought I did well. But once again, my parents were discussing what their next path, it was in their work and their careers. And my mother always taught. She didn't teach, I think, the first and second year of my life. I do not believe she did then. She could have, but I don't remember it if she did. But after that, she wasn't teaching. She was teaching in Kanawha. So from Ada, when we moved from Ada, she went back into the teaching profession. And my family, my mother and father, had to have discussed all of this. I keep saying that over and over because I'm pointing out that a safe child who doesn't hear, anything that other people are, these people are going through all of these things. And I'm sure that it happens in families. But a child is protected if the family really wants to not worry the child about, finances or whatever, change of life, moving, then they need to have parents that, like mine, who were, they were proud of me. I knew they were proud of me, and they made me feel I could do anything. And so prior, after I finished and such a star in the first grade, because I could color well, they had decided that my dad was going to complete his doctorate, or start it actually. He may have done some work already at East Central. They did also go to Oklahoma University for summer school during this time, and I remember, we lived in Norman, and I'm an Oklahoma State person, so I use that advisedly, about living in Norman. But no offense. It's Oklahoma, so it's like the Chickasaws and Choctaws. Here we are. But that memory Tanya just came back to me, that I remembered that. I remembered that they did go to summer sessions. But the summer that I was 6 years old, after the first grade, we went to New York City. And for my dad to go to NYU to work on his doctorate. And we had a green Chevy. It was a 1937 Chevy. And that's what we drove. We drove in it to New York City. And we had an apartment on Riverside Drive. And it was right across from Grant's Tomb. And Riverside Drive, there was a park. I've gone back and gone there as an adult since we lived there. But we lived on the ground floor of this apartment structure, and we had a doorman. And so he would always be there, when we went out. And there was, I remember almost the layout of that apartment. I was 6 years old, and in back of this there were tennis courts, and I could hear people playing the ball and that. So I was very much aware of that. I was very much aware of my environment there, and I think about the fact that I was 6 years old, and to have that experience living there was wonderful. The sidewalk, there was the sidewalk went up, I'll just say from west to east. I'm not sure if this is not official, but anyway, as we walked up across the street from where Grant's tomb was, as you walked, straight up the street, there's a sidewalk, and we would pass. There's a very famous church there, the Riverside Church, and it was built by the Rockefeller family, and it's a historic and famous church, and it had many famous ministers who were there, and it was not many. I think the Rockefellers were Baptist. I don't know that they started out that way, and once again, this is not a fact that I claim, necessarily as fact. But that's that. I hope I haven't done so many disclaimers that anybody listening to this will think, well, that fool, she doesn't know anything. But anyway, I went into that church. My family took me in. We attended it, and it's. I remember it now because I remember how we went in. I'm just saying that I do remember that, and I remember the structure. I was 6 years old. As you walk up and you go on past it, there's a big park that was on the side. It was on the riverside, and across was New Jersey, the Palisades of New Jersey. It was an amusement park over there. So it was a very interesting area. And as I said, my dad was enrolled at New York University. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, I was there in one of the greatest cities in the world. My parents, once again, I felt, well, this is my home. Every place I go with my parents, this is home, and it was one of the experiences. This is not of historical significance, but there was a ledge at the opening of our apartment, the door where the doorman stayed in front in a uniform, and so he was there one time when I crawled up on that ledge, and he said, "You mustn't do that." He said, "You could fall off." Well, as soon as he went away, I crawled up on that ledge, and guess what happened? I fell off, and I mean, he told me, and I did it. It was a prophecy. I had to fulfill it. And I have a bump on my head right here from where I hit. So I've never forgotten that. But my grandmother, Winnie Mae, was with us there, and she was quite glamorous. She was a glamorous woman. And so she went to some nightclubs there. We knew people from Oklahoma who were there, 2 or 3 people. And so she was going out to nightclubs and, things like that. And there was something my grandmother reminded me of this story. She's partying, and so the family was going to do something. And discussion was, well, Mom come too. I called her Mom. And I said, no, she can't. She cannot come because she goes out to nightclubs and she never takes us. Well, she was allowed to go in spite. But she thought that was pretty funny. That's how I learned it. But I remember when we drove home, we just dropped in at Mount Vernon, and I remember it vividly, that place, that territory. And my mother had a picture. There was a picture. My dad took it of my mother and me on the greensward behind the house, which is for me an iconic picture, and I've tried to have it painted. I do have it a painting of it, but I haven't been satisfied with it, and I keep trying to find someone who can do it right. But and I've interviewed lots of artists in Denver about it, and it's very difficult to find somebody to do what I want. So it's been let's say a 20-year project for me. And the reason I want to do that is because my mother, I said that she wanted something like that to happen to it. And my mother I was talking about her culture. She was a singer, she could sing, and she played the piano. And so my first piano lessons were given to me by my mother. There we are in New York City, and we took in all the sights. We went to the Rockefeller Center as a child. We went to see a movie there. We didn't see the Rockettes. That would have been, I don't know what I would have thought of that. I probably would have thought it was wonderful. I can remember the movie that we saw there, and this was it was not during the war, had not happened yet, when we were there. And we went there, we went to other places, and we went to the two beaches that were available. The movie that we saw in the Rockefeller Center was Blossoms in the Dust. And I think Greer Garson was in it, but I'm not sure. But I saw it with my parents. Have I said I felt safe with them? Anywho, the two beaches that we went to were Jones Beach and Coney Island. And I'm familiar with those places. That was where I've tried to trace back where I felt how I came upon this affinity for the ocean. And I never, it took me a long time to be away from it to realize it was then, because they took me there. I got to see it. I got to be in it. I got to play in the water in the ocean. And it was, I'm drawn to the ocean, as so many people are. I mean, it's not unique, but it is a universal experience, I think, for most people when they see this, giant body of water. And that was, those were just things that went along with, going to New York, living there. I had two little girlfriends who I made friends with, who lived up the Riverside Drive from me. I played with them, several times. And I don't know how, but I enjoyed it very much. They had magnificent dolls. They were this high, and they were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and I was so charmed by that. Oh, one of the things that when my dad and I were out walking on Riverside Drive one day, we happened to see these two girls. And I said, "Hottie." And they didn't say a word back to me. And I said to my dad, "Why didn't they say, hello back to me?" And he said, "They didn't know what you were saying." Hottie. They thought maybe, I don't know what they thought, but I'm sure he was right. But I remember where I bought this. We went to the Statue of Liberty, and I believe that's where I bought this doll. And because I had seen their dolls, they were so big and they were in old-fashioned outfits, I chose a doll that she's about this size. I still have her, and she's in pretty good condition. I've had a new wig put on her since I managed to ruin, her hair. And she's in a full dress. And can you tell me, do you think, it's not a secret who she is. Can you guess who it might have been? Somebody in a southern dress?
Other than Scarlett O'Hara.
That's who it was. It was Scarlett O'Hara. And I had no connection at all with Scarlett O'Hara, except she was in this costume. And my mother kept saying, look, here's a Shirley Temple doll right here. Look. I know I want it. And so, that's the doll I got. One of this, when we drove, we went to Washington, D.C. That was one of the trips back, and that was attached to the Mount Vernon visit. And so we made up a story, my brother and I, which we continued to say this happened. He's no longer living, but it was the fact that we claimed that when we went to the Lincoln Memorial, that he climbed up and got in Lincoln's lap. Mm-hmm. And so that's our story. I'm telling that to you today. And it's true. Not. But that was, the memories from that. And this is the thing that I think is so interesting. From that experience, we drove then back to Oklahoma. My dad became the dean of men at Miami, junior college, dean of men. And mother hired, this is the thing that I know another discussion took place. This is where we're going to work. We've got to work. We've got to have jobs. This is the only place. This for you to be dean of men is a step up. And my mother says, I will go to whatever job presents itself. And the job presented itself at a consolidated country school, Butner, which was close to Wewoka. So that's why I say, that Wewoka, I lived there, because it was the closest town next to it. And that school has been, it no longer exists. It was incorporated into a much larger school. But this is the thing I think about myself, that I was 6 and stepping out of the Rockefeller Center and moving to Wewoka, Oklahoma, and going to Butner Consolidated Country School. I mean, that's a change.
Drastic change, yes.
But it was just as smooth as glass. Going down there, my dad came home most of his, while I was in school, he was away during the week on his job, which at the time he hadn't become state supervisor of distributive education. But so that was not why he was away, but it may have been here at Butner that this officially began to happen, that he was no longer with us during the week, when my brother and me. I haven't talked about my brother. He was 2 years younger than I, and we were very close. But you don't even analyze it that way as a child. Mm-hmm. Your sister, your brother, that's who they are. We had terrible fights, and sometimes they were physical. But of course our parents didn't want that to happen, and finally they told Burris that we couldn't have, his name was Burris, his first name. I think I said that earlier maybe. But that they told him that he couldn't, we couldn't have those fights because they didn't want anything to happen to me that I couldn't have children. Which, I reminded him, I said, no more. But I developed this. My brother and I had, we had these, and I would get up and demonstrate it to you, but I won't. But I had the windmill jaw, not the uppercut, but I had the windmill jab, and he couldn't get near me when I did this. And anyway, so, but we were we were very much alike. And I'll talk about him later because he became a professional actor and did a great deal of TV work. In fact, while here Annette, I showed her something that my older daughter sent to us all, and her husband had discovered on Turner Classic Movies that channel there was, because they do things like this occasionally, featured him and spoke of him and said, you may not, his work was done in the 80s and 90s and some early in the 70s as well, or later 70s, but his professional name was Burr DeBenning, and I told him that he had made it because it was said, what do these people have in common? And he mentioned the actor Perry, who played Perry Mason. His name was Raymond Burr. Mm-hmm. I'm sure everybody, people today don't, if they watch television, because those things, this still comes on, Perry Mason, but that was who, DeBenning and Raymond, who are they? And that was then the TV Guide crossword puzzle. I said, you've made it. You're in the TV Guide puzzle. But he did a lot of work, and I joke about it. He played villains some. He was described in this article as a character actor, but he was a very good-looking guy. And when he was little, I certainly didn't look at him and think you're good looking. And nor did he look at me and think I looked any good either. But back to, if I don't want to get too sidetracked, I think I'm really trying to concentrate and try to be chronological, but as we discussed previously, when I think of something, I'll get back to it if it's an important thing. Sure. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to eliminate them. I ought to keep track of them. Here, I said that. Anyway, I'll try not to do that. So there I am at this country school. My mother was teaching there. She was hired to teach there. And this was in 1941. It was the summer of 41 that we were in New York City. And we drove back to Oklahoma, and she was hired as a teacher for this school. She taught there, she was there for my second and third grades. She taught me. And but in the middle of the third grade, another teacher came in, and so Mother then began to teach higher in the high school part, because that's really where she was qualified to do, and taught algebra, and I don't think she was teaching Latin there. But the fact of the matter is, we stayed on campus. They had there was a bus barn, for the buses that drove out and brought in the kids out in the country to school. I think it had 4 apartments in it above. And the apartments were 3 rooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom. And then there was no bathroom as such. What was attached, my mother chose that we would be in the back apartment, so that we had a view out of the countryside rather than the front apartment, which would be looking out on the busway, and also we could see the school from there. So it was a prettier view, and so that was why she wanted the back apartment. But there was no bathtub there. There was a room right next to the bedroom that had a toilet in it, and then the other apartment on the front, which was identical to ours, 3 rooms, living room, dining room, and kitchen, and then this room that had a toilet. So all of the baths that we took, my brother and I took them in a tin tub. And, I think about that, to heat up that water and, bring it in and fill up this little tub and put these kids in it. And because I was a girl, he had to bathe after me. And we used the same bath water. And I've thought about that a lot. But when we moved there, my brother was young. I was 6. He was 4, so he was not going to get to go into school. My mother hired somebody. I just think she knew these people in Ada, and she arranged for it. I mean, I'm just observing this happening. All of this stuff I put together, and realized, why I didn't know why they had come to live with us. They came. They slept on the sofa or a bed, that was a pull-out. We didn't have another room for them. They came. My mother hired them. They came and were there, to take care of my brother. And I finally, put that together. And then when he went into the first grade, which he did. He must have been, he went into the first grade when I went into the 3rd grade. So we know, because he was in school, we no longer had to hire them. And I remember one of the names. The other, there were 2 of them I remember specifically. But one was Helen. Her name was Helen Cranig, and both of the people that came and were there were really, really nice. And they just lived with us in this small, area, because the other rooms were big. We did have our piano in there, and that was where my mother, it was an upright, and the brand was Chickering. And it was a brand that I still think of it as a really good brand. And it is. I mean, it's recognized as it, not, wasn't elevated as a Steinway, of that caliber. Mm-hmm. But it was it's beautiful, and I still have it. And I'm awfully glad that I do. My younger daughter has it, and I know that she will always have it. Or it will, but you can't control those things, You cannot push your children, say, okay, this means a lot to me, you keep it forever now, because you just can't do that. You think of what you'd be carrying. Well, we've got this old bed. It's not comfortable, but we're going to keep it because Mother said we had to. I do, and I've forgotten now that I've said that, where I was going to go with that. But I'll continue on with.
You mentioned Butler.
Butler. The living there was a wonderful experience for me. I look back on those were the days of just complete joy. I mean, I was with my family. It was very hard for me to separate from my family. I missed them so. Just, I know it's an experience that everybody does. The first time I went away to church camp, I was there one day, and I thought, and I was a freshman in high school, and I thought, I've got to get back. I've got to go back home. And they talked me out of it, and it did, and I became okay. But I was homesick immediately, and just for the people I wanted around me, my family. And I've always felt that way about my family. I just enjoy being with them. I'm enjoying being, with my son and his beautiful wife. Mm-hmm. And she's very supportive of me. And very beautiful person. So I'm blessed that way with, now that I have children, I have more people I don't want to leave. That's what happens. But that's what life is, and everybody does it. What I'm telling you, I do think I've had some unique experiences, educational experiences, but relatively lives are, follow a similar pattern. And right now I'm just kind of talking in cliches about it, but back to the past. Always it is. This interview is, of course. But my parents were gardeners, and wherever we lived, they had a garden. And my mother grew up in Stonewall, Oklahoma, which was close to Ada. You can drive out of Ada and go to Stonewall easily. I mean, it's not very far from Ada. My dad was born in Texas, and he grew up in Texas and Arkansas and in Oklahoma too. And so he as well as my mother, both of them separately, had this same experience of gardening. And you do it because you like to, and you also do it for other reasons, to feed the family. Or you bring those things in. My mother canned, and I don't know that people can much these days, but others, most people in the country did. If you lived in the country, do you can anything? Do either have you ever? I did made some grape jelly once in Littleton because I had a friend who had a grape arbor. And she brought them to me, and she made me complete it. She wrote out all the instructions. She said, "You're going to make this," and I did. But the kids I was at school with, I had wonderful friends. I loved them, and my mother taught me in the second grade and the third grade, the first half, as I said. And if I get repetitive, remind me of it, because I don't want to, tell the same story over and over again, how special my parents were. Mm-hmm. But it was a unique experience to be taught by your mother because you have a close relationship with her, obviously. And she was my mother, and I had priority. I was her daughter. And so she had to establish lines. Mm-hmm. And she told me once, though, that she really appreciated having me in the class that she was teaching. My son likes to, there's a small school out here, so when I talk about the consolidated country, he thinks, he knows it isn't that little wooden church, that white wooden, not
Pleasant
church,
Valley.
But yeah, school, yeah. There's where you went to school, Mother. There's your country school. No, it wasn't that. But they worked gardens, so they rented the land when they did it. There was no place there for them to have a garden. They had down below where we lived, they had a huge thing, and I wrote about it. I tried to imagine how they went about it and who they approached and how much it cost to do this. And I decided that maybe they made an agreement, that they would share the harvest and then pay just a little bit more, whatever. When we moved to Stillwater, they did the same thing because when we first moved here, we lived in a place that there was not room for a garden. So we had a garden, and it was a big garden out east of Stillwater off of 51. And that was a wonderful experience, too. It's just being around them when they were, I didn't look at it this way then, But I look back, I've analyzed it and looked back up on it. Every place that they were, there was always some secret place that my brother and I could make our own. And we did. We played together if when we weren't fighting. And I wasn't going this way, but we were together in what we wanted to do, and this is a thing that I cannot believe I didn't do. I never did help them in the garden, and now I would give anything in the world to go back. I don't want to burst into tears, but to say, listen, I want to work this with you. I want to do it with you, because that's the way I feel now. I feel so many things like that related to, as I keep reminding myself, I was a child, and the world revolves around you, and so you think, or many children do, and parents' leaders made me think that. They were so supportive and encouraging to me. But the school, I had wonderful friends. I can remember my friends, Betty Sue, my friend Wanda, and my friend Patricia, those three specifically. And the custodian of the campus of the school lived down from where we were in the apartment. And so we played with the children of the custodian's children. And I won't mention their names, but I could, but I'm not going to. But we were friends with them on the campus, my brother and I, when we would be out playing. And there was also a creek behind the apartment, and behind us there was a house. A boy lived there with his parents. So I've often thought about what caused him to have, not his parents, his grandparents. How did that happen? I never did know. There are lots of questions that I have come upon in my later, since I've become an adult last year. I wish I had thought, because I'm curious about all these things. Now, I was curious then. Why is he living with his grandparents? And he wasn't going to the school. He was going into Wewoka school. Somehow they were getting him in there to attend school. But I had these friends, and excuse me, there were wonderful things about that. As I mentioned, the creek. We had to always be careful. We had adult supervision when we were around the creek, at least out, so that we could be within, visual distance of my parents. We would crawdad fishing in that. It was kind of a Huckleberry Finn experience. There was a. I went exploring around it. I think, when my mother, I remember going into a culvert. There was a bridge over it, and just being let loose. And I was roaming the countryside there. That's what we were doing. The country was our playground, literally. My parents, they grew up as country kids, doing all the things one would do out in the country. And so that was given to my brother and me. And we went out, in the fall, we would go out hunting for bittersweet for my mother to bring home for decorating the house. And we also, not every autumn, but many would go out and collect Bodark apples. Do you know what the Osage oranges are you familiar with? Mm-hmm. And I did when we lived in Tulsa. My husband and I did find a tree between here and Tulsa that was easy to get to. Sometimes it's not so easy to get to these trees. My son and daughter-in-law had a tree not in their backyard, but it was right adjacent to their backyard in Wichita. And the Osage oranges are Bodark apples, or my husband called them horse apples. They fell over the fence, And I was privileged to have some of them given to me. But they have a wonderful smell. And my parents also, don't tell anybody this. Okay, what I'm going to tell you now. Don't tell anyone.
Okay.
We went out to the countryside and dug up dogwood trees and brought them to our house in Stillwater. This was after we built the house, so I'd gone from past to future, and I'm going to go back. But that was fun. I mean, we just did these things. This was what you did. You went out, you got in a car, and you drove the countryside, and you got out, and you ran around in it. But I remember specific things, and I will just say two of them about it. It was a very happy time in my life. And there was a potato roast. I didn't know, anything about a potato roast. But the boys down, the boys who lived down below us, they were the ones, they were supervising it. There was such excitement on the campus. I mean, it was a Saturday, and so the children that had access to the campus were all involved in this. And so they were the ones, the boys down there, and the oldest one I think was 13. There was one in my grade just ahead of me. He was when I entered school, he was in third grade. He was a big third grader when I was a second grader. But they were experts on how to do a potato roast. And so they built the fire and got it ready. And I've gone through, I've tried to do those steps in my mind and written them down because I am trying to record that on paper. But, you had to bring a potato and we had to persuade our parents that we could handle this. We were going to be okay where this fire was. But my dad, I know, he came out and he sat and observed us from the steps to the buses. It was our apartments were over the school buses, so it was high off the ground because the school buses are big. Anyway, we had stairs that went up to our apartment. So he sat. I recall that he sat on the steps while this fire was getting ready for the potatoes. And so we roasted them in this, getting the embers just right. And, the fire had to be just right to get that potato in there. We didn't have foil or anything like that, then to put them in. So it was just potato put in there. And when they were done, it's the best potatoes. I have never eaten a potato that's tasted that good to me since. It was so wonderful. The other thing that this campus had was over at the one side of it, there was a clay pit. And it was a secret from a lot of people. A lot of people didn't know about it, but I had friends that told me about it and introduced it to me. And you could put your hand down in it, and you just, feel around, and then you'd pull out this clay and you'd smell it. And it was so wonderful. It was just such a great thing to know that you could do that, just reach in, get out, play, and then, make whatever you wanted to make. The other thing about this country school was right across the street from us, there was a store. And it was, it had small things in it, like bread and milk that you could get there, but it also had a candy counter. That was a very popular place, for the students. I look back on those days, and when things that are really good are happening, you don't really know how good they are until you get away from them, and then you know they were just. There was a blessed time. But once again, a change was going to be coming to our family. This is one thing that is important that I want to share. As I said, it was 1941. So there was on December the 6th, my dad was home for the weekend. He was there for Saturday and Sunday. This is not connected to the other thing that I'm going to share, but my dad at this time decided that he was going to read a Christmas Carol to us. He's going to read us this Dickens novel. I'm 7 by this time, and my brother is 5. And we were on the couch. We were lying by my dad, and now I look back and I mean, because I've timed it. I mean, to read it, it would have taken him a long time to read it. So, and I realized he had to have cut it. I mean, he had, and I think maybe he started cutting it when my brother starts going like this. But I always, I wanted to impress my dad, so I just, even though a lot of it I didn't understand what I was reading, but I was interested. While my brother was, squirming around. But my dad finished it. He finished reading it. That's why I know he had to have shortened it, as he went along. And he may have even had a shortened version. But I'm saying that just to point out, I've talked a lot about my mother's influence, but that my father was an educator too, who valued books and reading. And that's, I know that my mother she wasn't sure that we would fully appreciate this experience. And at that time, my grandfather, my Native American grandfather, was staying with us. He slept on the couch in the living room, as visitors did when they came, because we were out in the country. So my dad was doing this on that weekend, and then the next Monday, when we were all gathered together in the school auditorium, and I remember it seemed kind of somber. I mean, but we were still children, and we were, talking, but there seemed to be some kind of air that was different from our regular assemblies. And besides that, we'd had an assembly the Friday before, because that was the day for assemblies. But here we are, it's Monday, and it's the 8th of December, and we're going in for another assembly. And I looked at my mother, and her face, I could tell by looking at her face that something that had happened, something was wrong. And she's standing. I'm sitting in the auditorium. We're marshaled in, and we sit in our rows. And we had all school assemblies. Our assemblies were held often with upper, the seniors, juniors, sophomores. And so she was standing way over from where I was sitting. We'd gotten in there in our seats, and then she was over against the wall. I could see her face, and I knew something was up. Well, the principal announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed on Sunday. And I knew from the look on my mother's face that it was bad. And that's how I knew. That's how I learned about Pearl Harbor. I never ever, I should have been able to talk to her a little bit more about it, because I feel she must have known. They took us in and told us all together, but the fact was that the communication out to the countryside, the people in the country, they may not have even had a radio, but most people did. And people, of course, had telephones. I mean, I make it sound like it was, we're really living in a primitive way, but it wasn't. But it's not like today that, that instantly, information is shared. That's the way that it is technically for us now. But whether she knew, whether she'd heard, I'm trying to think about the time. I don't know that I wrote the time down when it happened on December the 7th. I don't have it written down, but it was announced by President Roosevelt on the radio, and he made the famous statement, "A day that will live in infamy, a day of infamy that will live forever." So I am taken into this knowledge through the reaction of a parent, and also by the principal sharing this information that our country is now at war. And so this is when my mother is thinking about this, and she's looking at all of these young men, or their boys, in junior, senior high. I mean, and many of them, after that, they didn't complete high school. I mean, they came back eventually, I'm sure, and did, but it caused young men who were 18 to sign up. And that, I think that I share that because it was certainly historically important, but it was also, to me, it was important the way that I learned it. And I learned it, I knew, I didn't know what it was, but I knew something terrible had happened just by looking at my mother. And she was thinking about who would be. She had a husband. We didn't know what would happen with my dad. He didn't, as it turned out, have to go because of the family. But if the war hadn't ended, he would have had to go into the service, we think. And my mother had a brother that she was concerned about, and he did go into the service, and he was a sergeant. He ended up as a sergeant in the Army or in the Air Force, and he was a top turret gunner. And so while the war was going on, actually, that we lived through 41 to 42, and so it was in 42 we moved to Stillwater, and it was, once again, I went because my parents, I was with them, of course, and that's the way it was. And so when we moved to Stillwater, my life was set up really at that point. I can look back and say that as far as my education was concerned, because it was a college town, and Mother did tell me, at one point she said that was one of the reasons that we moved there, because college was there and you would have access to that. And when we moved here, we stayed it was off of Elm Street, I think. We lived in it was not a motel thing, but it was a court with houses in it. And I've tried to look at it, and it's not there any longer. There was I'm trying to think of the tree that was there. There was a mulberry tree. And we couldn't eat any of the berries because if we were told, that they were wormy. So of course we didn't. But we lived there, and then we moved to 308 Cleveland Street. And we had a wonderful house there. There were 3 houses on that block. Ours was in the middle. There was a house at the end of the block, and there was our house. And then there was Dr. Gray's house next to us. And the south side of his house ran ran next to 4th Street. So 4th Street is over, here's 4th Street, and here's University, or it was college. It was University, so it had to be College Avenue at the time when I was there. And our house was, down in, we had 3 houses there, and then the house on the corner, there's another little road there. It was a kind of an alleyway. You moved here in 1996, did you say? Mm-hmm. Well, the water tower was still there in that park. I don't know if you remember it.
Tower Park. Tower Park.
Is that the name of the park? And I was telling, we actually, during one of these other summers, we lived in Stillwater. See, I'm going back now again to, we lived on Walnut. We came one summer while my parents, so I'm remembering these things as we go along. It's another time that they were very focused on education. They came back and were in school. I think my dad must have been in school. I don't think my mother was, but she might have been. But we were here during these interims that I'm describing to you. So we lived there, and we were right across from the water tower, and so I had friends there as well. And
you also lived on, was it 11th or 12th?
Who did?
On 11th or 12th? Didn't you live on 12th and a half, or one of that little white house that was?
Oh, that was when I was in college. I mean, married and stuff there.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm sorry.
I did live there. I was on husband.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
But I had friends. I mean, all of those. The Kappa Alpha Theta house was there on that corner. It still is today. But there were no other fraternity houses. The Sigma Alpha Epsilon house was right here. But those played, the reason I'm bringing them, because they played into our childhood, because we had reasons to be associated, with just to play. But I won't.
So that was in 4th grade when you lived?
Yeah, I moved into after the 3rd grade, we moved from consolidated country, from the Wewoka area to Stillwater.
And that's when you lived on Cleveland?
Yes, when I was
in Cleveland, dead into Gray. I mean, into 4th.
Yes.
And that was adjacent to Gray.
Okay.
Gray Street deaded into Dr. Gray's house.
Okay.
Because that's now where the Pi Beta Phi house is.
Well, I am aware of that too.
That's all ironic.
It is. Because we played, I mean, this is, we were talking about it, her sorority house is there. That was all playground for us. Although Dr. Gray, who was a dentist, he didn't like us. He didn't want us in his yard. We had a big front yard too. It was a really nice house that we were in. And my parents debated for a long time whether to keep that house and do some things to it. It had 2 bedrooms, so we needed another bedroom. But they decided, once again, to do something that involved us, of course, and they decided they would build this house over here at 1424 West 9th, which we moved into at the end of my or 8th grade, I think. I think it was during the time in the 8th grade when we moved into it. And that was the second house that I got to supervise the construction of.
Which was an exact replica?
It was an exact, yes, it was, of the outside structure. They reversed the sides. So what was on, as you walked in the door, what was on this side when we lived in Ada was the living room. But they changed that, so when you walked into the door of the one here, and it's still here, and it still looks good, 1424 West 9th, the dogwoods that I was talking about, what we had dug up, they were planted in the yard, and they became beauty spots that people would come by and look at because of the beautiful, blossoms, and stop, and prom pictures would be taken there, and those are the dogwood you can't tell that, we dug those up.
There's not very many in Stillwater.
They're not.
At
I
all,
mean,
so-
they do have a life, and it's not a long one. So they were, as you say, there are not many, and then they're not there anymore because their lifespan has ceased. The house is the same one, and as I said, I was supervising the construction of it as a 2-year-old and as a middle schooler. The house itself, they're right across is a kitty corner from the Cross House, and that's on. Is that Gray? No, yeah, it's Gray that goes. It's isn't it Gray that goes by the house on the west side? So Gray across the street. Here's 9th Street. Here's Gray this way, and their house, the Cross House, was just like this, related to our house. Well, it has. I'm worried about it, but it has. It's been nominated as a state historical house, and it's just being people who are attached. One of them is she works for the news press, and I've talked with her a little bit about it. She told me because she happens to co-own the house that has been designated a historical house. She said that my old house was right on the cusp, and she felt sure that it could have been designated as an historical house because it was built at the end of the war. And it was built by the Ingham Lumber Company that is no longer here in Stillwater, but it was one of the best lumber companies in Stillwater. And they were told, my folks, by the constructors, that it was the first house of substance that they had built since the war. And the finishing, it's not a large house. It's Cape Cod. There was somebody who wanted to engage me in a discussion when I was in college about the fact that my house, that the Cape Cod house, didn't belong on the prairie. And I'm not both. It was a grown man that I will not. I thought a lot about it, that he would discuss that with me. It wasn't right. That was my house, and he shouldn't have said, your house doesn't belong here. He was thinking that Frank Lloyd Wright house should, but anybody that built a house ought to build something like that for the prairie. But my mother loved that house, and my dad must have too, because they wanted to build it the second time, and they did. And I tried to buy that house. I wish I could have. But I think that I would have tried to make it, I would have restored it, because things had been done to it. And I'm sure these things, people have a right to do these things who own them. And so I understand that. And it just was a shame that I couldn't buy it, because I could afford to have done it at the time when it was up for sale, but I couldn't make it happen. But we drive by it now, and it looks nice. And so that's very rewarding to see a house that you owned, your parents did, and loved.
So what color was your bedroom?
Well, my bedroom had wallpaper in it.
Oh, okay. So.
And I got to pick out the wallpaper in it. And one of the things that I have gone back over in my life, and I've discussed with Annette, is what, as a child, I was able to enjoy about the association with the university here, or the college here. And my dad took us to the football games. Beginning in the 4th grade, we went to some. We didn't go to every one, but we sat in the end zone. and we sat on bleachers that were wood. And I'm not sure what we paid for them. Maybe, I don't know whether we paid 50 cents to get in or what it was. But we thought, my brother and I, that that's where the good seats were. And that who would want to sit in the middle when you can sit here in the end zone? We grew to appreciate having seating farther into the stadium. I played at the Theta House. I played on that porch, but I only did it in the summer. I didn't do it when the house was full of girls living there. And I felt a little naughty because it was a place that normally you shouldn't be around necessarily. But the neighborhood, times are very different now, as you are well aware, about being the freedom of a child to walk. And my school, I went to Eugene. What's the name?
There was a Eugene Fields.
That was it. Mm-hmm. That was my school. And
that's where Sprouts is now.
Yes.
Okay.
And I loved going there. I enjoyed that. I just enjoyed school. And how could I not? My parents were a lover of, they passed that on to me.
How would you get there?
I walked.
Okay.
And I could do it. I was safe, and I walked. And the corner that was, I can't remember what the street is, but the next street up from Washington, going west.
Monroe?
They're right there.
Jefferson.
Is it Jefferson? Okay. So. At that corner, Jefferson, going across the street, going south, was where the guard would be with the crossing, so that you could cross at that place. And I was really I wasn't going to go out and protest, but I was really sorry to see that go, because I just it's a memory but one thing that I know, you can take the building away, but it doesn't destroy the memories. They are intact. You can keep them. And so I was in that school. I had wonderful teachers. And Miss Reagan was my 4th grade teacher. Miss Lawhon was my 5th grade teacher. And Mrs. Troth was my 6th grade teacher. And my mother was, at that time, she taught at Lincoln. Okay. She entered the school system as a substitute teacher until she went on full time at Lincoln. She loved her principal. There was one thing I noticed about my mother. The 2 schools that she taught at here in Stillwater, she taught at Lincoln, and then she moved to Westwood. But she admired the principals at both places. And I have a friend here who doesn't live here now. He's moved to Nevada. He lives there now, or maybe it's Utah. But he has moved away, and I didn't know him in school because he was in a whole other school than I was. There were 3 grade schools. There was Lincoln, Eugene Field, and Jefferson, and that Jefferson was on Main Street, and it was north of 6th Street. So those 3 schools were there, and then we had one junior high. We all went to the same junior high, and that was done at the building. I'm not sure whether that building is still there. Is it? I think it is.
Was it where the community center? Community center is now.
Well, I thought the community center was in the old high school building.
That's part of this. The public library on that side is the high school, or maybe I've got them reversed.
I think it's reversed.
Reversed, okay.
But I don't know for sure. But I think that building is still there. The high school is definitely where the community center is, because I've been in there, and I mean, you could tell it just was, the infrastructure was more for
The
activities of a high school.
During the time that our house was being built, we didn't live in the 308 Cleveland house. We had to leave it, and we lived in this part of, well, I'm not quite sure what the location of this is. I'd have to think about it, but we lived close to, we lived down off of Main Street in an apartment over a garage, and the man who was the foreman of our job, of the house, building the house, we lived right behind him. And so we were in a small, but in this apartment we had our own bathtub. And my brother didn't have to take his bath after me. That didn't have, neither one of us had a bedroom. While the house was being built, my parents and my brother slept in the one bedroom, and I slept on the sofa it was day bed. I slept on that, and it was, but I enjoyed living there. And my playground was that area where this building down south that I'm talking about was. There was an old bandstand there too, a concrete thing. It's no longer there, but I loved playing on that. It was, I had an imagination that served me, to enjoy things. I've never said I am bored. I've never said it. I do say I find something boring, but I've never said I am bored. And I'm not trying to sound like Pollyanna or anything like that. I just refuse to say that. I think that, but I just can cite times when, that I was just playing with sticks and enjoying it, and my brother too. And that bandstand that was there there was a building down there that we called the Music Shack, and that's where our band from Stillwater High School band rehearsed, at this building adjacent to the bigger building that's there. And that's where we went to the bigger building. We went to the 7th and 8th grade in, and then the high school was a building down. I believe that's Duck Street. I may be wrong. Is that, you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But the building that's where the community center is, and it says junior high on it.
Yes.
And so that was our high. And I kept thinking, it says junior high, and we're in high school. Why? Why is this? But I was placed there, and it disrupted my life in that I had moved away from the neighborhood that I grew, was there in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And all of my friends were now in a different part of town. And so I was kind of displaced, but it didn't ruin my life. There were some things, that happened related to that, but nevertheless, it was an area that was, what I started to say about my friend Bill Smith, and I brought him up. He was in Lincoln when my mother was teaching there. She didn't teach him though, and as I mentioned, her principal was Florence Barr, and Bill has told me things, but that Florence Barr said to him as the principal, and talking to him and telling him how, and he was going to Lincoln School, which at that time it was a collection of different socioeconomic area at that time, and maybe still is. I know it's not. Is it a functioning school still?
It's a special type school for students that are having problems.
One of the things that has just come to my mind that I'll mention that my mother talked about. The way that you connect with the university when you live here, it's different. I will mention that later. When I talk about the university. But when I was in grade school, we were going to. Do you think it's time? It's past 11:30 to. Do you think to go into 12?
That's fine.
Is that okay? I mean,
Yeah,
you tell.
It's fine with me. I'm
Okay,
on your
well,
off schedule today.
Well, let's just go on to 12 and then take a break maybe at that time.
Okay.
But while we lived at 308 Cleveland Street, next door to the soon-to-be Pi-Fi house, the things the university offered, they had a summer program, and once again, I point out, I was a child. I was in the 4th grade when we moved there. But there were movies that were offered, and they were played. These movies were shown at the college auditorium, which is now displaced by the Saratine Center. Mm-hmm. And I loved the college auditorium. Every theater student who was here at that time loved it. We loved both of the places where we could do the shows and where we had classes. One of them was the Prairie Playhouse, which was in the Williams Hall, which was an iconic building that is no longer there. But it was a wonderful building, and it housed the Prairie Playhouse, and we had a lot of theater classes in that building, and it was much smaller stage than the college auditorium, but we had access to that stage, for classwork, and that's where I had my directing class because the stage was right there for us to use it, and it was smaller. But the college auditorium was doing these reach out to the community, or the community could avail itself. There are always all kinds of ways that the community was served as it can be. For instance, it was a source for expertise in many things. One of them was in music, and all of my family, all of our piano teachers came from the university. And when I took voice lessons, I was on campus taking that, as a kid. But when the summer series was there for showing movies, I was talking about this the other day. Was I talking to you about when I built the Globe Theater? Did I mention that? Oh, that when I was in college, I did it, which was Shakespeare's theater on the south side of the Thames, but and it's there now. There is a structure of it, but nevertheless, we went. There was a movie, and it was called, I think it was Henry V. I really need to check it out. But I am sure my son said last night to me, as I was talking about the Allied Arts series at the college when I was a student, it was offered to the town as well. And I know that there are still those, I don't know what they're called now, but they're available to the community, and it's a rich tapping of a source to grow, that comes from the university to the town if you're alert to it and want to do it. So it was a movie, and it starred Laurence Olivier, and he mentioned to me, he said, "Well, didn't you see Laurence Olivier?" And I said, "No, not in person." I mean, he was thinking that I saw him. He was the one that directed this movie. And it starts out in the Globe Theater. And so it shows the Globe, and it shows in London, and of course it's a model probably, but I didn't look like that to me when I was in the 5th grade. And there's they had the flagpole, and so they put up different colors if they were going to have a comedy or a drama. But so that's set up for you, so you know that you're going into this theater. And while we're doing it, there are women's parts in it. And I remember as a child looking and thinking, those women are not very pretty. I'm surprised. I thought they would be pretty. Well, since I'm a grown person now, I realize they were men, because women were not allowed on the stage, and they were men and playing, or young men playing, the women. And then, but what happened was, it was, as you viewed this play and you saw these characters doing it, it was like magic, and suddenly it became real. And so these young men who were playing women became beautiful women. Mm. And the makeup was gone, because everybody was in makeup, and it was very, not, well, I guess I could say garish, but it was, you could see it was, the makeup was exposed, of course, in the first thing when you saw the actors. However, when it became real life, there wasn't any makeup. I mean, it was just natural people up there. And Prince Hal, his makeup was gone, and he was handsome Laurence Olivier. And there is, I'm trying to, I don't know the exact words about, the world in this. I'd have to check it out, and please forgive me the inaccuracy of it. But the world in an O, and meaning the O of the globe, which was circular. So you see the world there. And of course, Shakespeare did show us the world. But so that's what I was exposed to. That, and there was the other memories that was a very vivid memory for me, and of seeing it. And I was 10, or 9, not, I was 12, I was 13 in the freshman, so I was maybe 9 or 10 seeing that Shakespeare production.
Well, you had said that just in general, the influence of the academics that you had access to
in all
shaped
ways
so many things that you did and achieved and aspired to. You mentioned even with like Girls State, how, I mean, you were prepared. You were always, no matter what presentation you needed to do, or vocally or prose, or
right.
Your mother was very resourceful.
My mother, the thing about her was, I was always amazed, and I've mentioned it to Annette. She had a wide range of knowledge. I mean, her knowledge when it came to poetry was way beyond mine. And I competed in high school in speech competitions, and she was my resource person for whatever I did, and especially for the poetry part of it. And I didn't know, I mean, through all of the learning or the education that I've gone through, none of the stuff that she knew was anything that I came in contact with. So my mother was another, source of stuff. But I mentioned, having, piano lessons, voice lessons. I also was coached by theater department staff members. When I was a freshman, when I was a senior in high school, I'm going to save just a little bit more for add to my high school experience for when we begin again, and then I want to go into my college area. But I knew these teachers. First, I began knowing them, when I was young, and nobody had to recruit me for the college, because the people that you met and you knew they were your friends. And so that's one of the reasons that I love this place so much, because I just feel like the whole town lifted me. And for anything, that I've done or achieved, I feel like I just had, it's just like, it says with when you're embraced by the Lord, you're in the everlasting, arms. And so the arms of the university are everlasting too, and also the city itself, because as a speech competitor, I was out giving not talks, but doing the performances that I did. They were always looking for people to just come and be the program, and I always accepted, and I did them, and I reported to I just all of the women's organizations were, and also others as well, but I remember particularly the Women's Business Association. It had a specific name, but it was that, but I did that, and it would be, and people knew me just because of that. Somebody that I wouldn't have no association with. I may have given a program and they might have remembered me, and so people would speak to me, that I didn't know, but I did. I don't want to. I am giving you my history, and since it is related to me, I don't want it to sound, and I'm afraid it does, self-serving or any way elevating myself, at any level. I think it's an honor to get to do this, to share my history with you. Mm-hmm. And I know, in no way think that I am. The only reason if I am special, if I am, and I'm not saying that I am, and I don't think of myself that way, but if any way that I am, I thank my town, and I thank my association with the college that has given me so much, and just that's not to say that I'm not. I'm a human being, and of course everybody has these experiences. It's not unique. But I do feel this town, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to make a contribution to downtown, to the Main Street. But I have sensed, there's something else that we've come up as a family to decide that we can do as well. Because I want this, and the town will always be alive because of the university. As the downtown was we had no, it was just this, the downtown was the downtown. And I'm sure you've had people that you have talked about that in relationship to this. I don't know how many Stillwater people, I'm sure of the number that you've interviewed. 500, what was the number? No. More? Anyway, the town itself, I mean, I can rattle off for you, the names of the stores downtown and our association with them and how we thought of them, and it was personal. It wasn't because we went in all these places, we shopped in them, and they were at where the high school is, where it says junior high, the community center. We could walk very easily, downtown. The access from the school was great. And so from that school, I also could walk to the Carnegie, the library, which is, the beautiful old library down on 6th Street. And that was, I'm going to say this before I forget it. I think I've written it down. I haven't looked at my notes. When we pause it briefly, I'm going to check through. But one of the things, that my mother's and father's education associates that they met during, they went to East Central. They also attended Oklahoma University, and my mother got her master's degree in English from OSU, Oklahoma A&M at the time, and so they developed friendships, attached to these, and one of the friendships that my mother reestablished when we moved here was her friendship with Mamie and Edmund Lowe. Mm. And their house their house that they lived in was not far from the library that's on 6th Street. And so I remember, they had 2 sons that were in school with me. Frances, their daughter, was already in high school when I was in the 4th grade, or she was older. But the first time that we went to their house, we visited them. Frances, the daughter, took me to the library. And it's odd, and I'm sure that I had been in libraries before, although I think my mother would have taken me to a library. I don't remember that. But boy, I remember going into that library. It was a wonderful experience. And the room that housed the children's books was, as you walked in the front, it was to the left. And my mother always, because it wasn't from this particular time, but she would read, as teachers still do, I believe. She would have a children's book that she would read, read to the class. And I discovered Anne of Green Gables in there. And Anne of Green Gables has expanded my world. We went to Prince Edward Island, which is, you look like you could be an Anne of Green Gables with your coloring and your hair and the length and everything. But that is an expansion of my world, to go into Anne of Green Gables' world and actually literally go to her town and go in her house that she lived in. Mm-hmm. It was as an adult I did that. But that's what education and travel, can do. But the library was available, on lunch hours from when I was in high school. I could walk up. It was not far. I would go up there, and I would just be in there. And I took a banana. I would take a banana, and I would eat a banana for my lunch, and then I would be in there, and I would just be looking through the stacks, and I would find things that I wanted to see. It was a place that mattered to me a lot, still does. But I think that's interesting that from the Lowes and the Edmund Lowe, we've got the library at the university that is the Edmund Lowe Library, and that they were friends of my parents. And then from there, they took me to it's a story of the libraries. I read, there's a book that was on Reese Witherspoon's list, and it's called, I think it's called Fire. I just finished it. I don't remember the name of it. But it's about libraries, and it's about the library that burned in 1986, a fire in the Los Angeles library, and it deals with libraries everywhere. It's an interesting book. And so she was talking about going into libraries and what they mean, and how her mother took her into libraries, the author of the book, not Reese Witherspoon. And it's a major thing that we had them, and of course they were Carnegie, and that was a beneficial thing, just like the Rockefellers, built the Riverside Church and the Carnegie libraries. And it's nice. There may be other reasons to look at the wealth of these people and wonder about it a bit, but nevertheless, they gave charitably in ways that have affected our lives positively. I'm saying the obvious truths, and just you'll have to let me. You'll have to forgive me for that. But when we finally moved into our house, it was a great thing to be in it. And my mother, the thing that when we went into high school, junior high, when I was in junior high, I was living there right across from it. But the house that we were living in, that makeshift home for us, was right next door to the school almost. And so, I walked that, but that was an easy walk. The walk from high school to grade school. Those were longer, but I did walk a lot. I walked to high school from our house, but often I rode when I could. I would ride, but I had friends along the way, that I could stop and eat and have a cookie at somebody's house, and I did. But because I was walking with them, and that's what happened. I had three good friends on the way from my home at 1424 West 9th to the high school.
What are the names?
Oh, her name was Rilla Carlisle. One was Ruby Eager, and the other one was Betty Jo Douglas. And the other thing too, and I just want to say this, and that maybe we can get back to it. I was talking to you, and I think I was talking to my son Jimmy, that we were in school with the children. I wanted to say this. Well, I will say this, and you can remind me where we are when we get back.
Okay.
But my mother, as I said, was teaching at Lincoln, and she had a little boy in her class, and I think she was teaching 5th grade. I don't know. I think it was 4th or 5th grade. And she came home and told me a story, and there'd been a fire in the neighborhood. And she came in and she said, the boy in her class, he said, it was quite a conflagration. And she was, astonished at the use of that word. And then she realized that his parents were, teachers at the college. And so that was another bonus. We got to hobnob with those children, many of them extremely bright. And it was a wonderful thing to be able to do that. I had friends whose parents were. I mentioned Ruby Eager. Her dad was taught at the university, and the other two women, Rilla and Betty Jo, that was not the case. But they were bright too. I mean, it's just nice to have that have your world expanded by those things, mm-hmm. and to realize it too. And I did at the time. I've not gotten away from it and think, why didn't I think about that? I knew it at the time, that I was really in a wonderful situation to have that exposure to everybody. So it's time for a pause.
It's time for a pause. Okay. Well, thank you for this part.